Okay, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order this capital budget meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores. Second item is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Ask any member if they have a pecuniary interest with anything on the agenda they'd like to declare. Seeing none, you can declare one anytime if you need to. So that takes us into the budget overview, and we'll start with the CAO.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I've got some opening comments, and my first one is, well, I have good news and I have bad news. And, oh, hold on, that's the wrong speech. That was my speech from Saturday night when we celebrated the clerk's 30-year anniversary with the town and the Director of Community Services 25-year anniversary with the town. So I just wanted to start this morning by acknowledging 55 years of combined service. 30 of those happy, I think isn't that the line there. So good, thank you very much. But good morning. Today is another milestone day in Saugeen Shores as we begin discussion on our 2020 capital budget. Staff have reviewed priorities in context of available funding and capacity and have assembled a package of projects that will continue to maintain services, manage our infrastructure, and improve our quality of life. Once again, I'd like to thank the department heads, managers, and in particular Dan and his team for their leadership in this process. And we'll turn it over to the treasurer.
Before we do, I might just mention, too, there's another anniversary. Today is the one-year anniversary of this council. And so I would just say there's no better way to celebrate than with an all-day budget meeting. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And congratulations to council on their one-year anniversary. So welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. It is another exciting day, in some ways more exciting than the operating budget, because as David spoke to, what's being proposed today are real investments and substantial enhancements that certainly will make an impact and a difference in our community. So I'm happy to be here to present the budget. There were lots of thank yous given out during the last session. I didn't get that memo because I didn't give out any thank yous. I just took all the credit for myself. But I do want to make sure I take the opportunity to thank our finance staff for all of their support in preparing the budgets. Some of them contribute directly to the documents, but even those who don't participate directly in the budget, they're a very self-sufficient bunch. Which allows me to focus on what I need to be focused on at this time of year. Our clerk staff as well do a ton to pull this together. They're very forgiving when things aren't where they should be, and I appreciate that. The senior management team, I'm sure council realizes it, but I do want to point out that they do the vast majority of the work throughout this process. They determine their needs, and they put a lot of thought into planning their work for the year. Ever since I've gotten here, I've been continually amazed at the wide variety of knowledge that people in this organization have. I also want to thank council for their encouragement throughout the process and for the kind words I received after the operating budget presentation. It certainly helps grow my comfort level so that I'm better able to focus on delivering what I feel to be the key information and worrying less about making mistakes. So all that to say that council, the management team, the finance staff have all shown me a lot of patience and support as I learn my role, and I'm very grateful for that. And I just want to mention, I know I looked good at the last meeting, but I had to save something for today, so I am wearing a new belt just to up things a little bit.
Good. Nice belt.
Yeah. The budget we're proposing today is management's best advice on the projects that are required to maintain our infrastructure and meet our goals. We try to allocate our resources as best as we can to achieve that, but of course we have constraints and we try to advance those items while staying fiscally responsible. We do include 5-year forecasts for our operating divisions and program areas, but please keep in mind that these are informational only. Nothing beyond 2020 is being approved, and staff are not explicitly looking for direction on longer-term capital plans during this meeting. We include those summaries simply so that Council has a glimpse into the projects and spending levels that may be needed in the future. As such, we encourage Council to keep the discussion as focused on the 2020 capital items as possible, but of course we welcome all comments from Council. The capital funding from taxation for 2020 represents a 2% increase over last year's amount. That's quite small. It's only about $30,000. But we fit that small taxation funding increase within our overall budget. And all of the assumptions about tax rates and legacy fund contributions from the previous meeting remain valid. Nothing has changed there. The additional requests that are included in Section 10 under Council requests are not included, and if those requests are approved with taxation funding, then all those things we said the first time around about impact to the legacy reserve transfer would still apply. So we did include a 5-year capital forecast, and I'll just show the full corporate-wide summary here. I don't want to get into the details, but I do want to mention that something that tends to happen to us during the budgeting process, and I think to all municipalities, is that we have all kinds of projects that could happen or should happen, and because of financial constraints, we sometimes need to push those projects off. We have no shortage of needs and no shortage of good ideas, and that's why in this 5-year summary you sometimes see that the numbers get bigger as we look into the future. It's partially new needs and ideas and partially economic realities of not being able to fit those items in 2020. We've also included a 2020 budget summary, so the corporate-wide 2020 budget with all of its different funding sources. Just to avoid any confusion, the carry forward column that you see there is included in the summary, but typically we have not introduced prior year approved amounts as part of the budget package. The reason that those are in there this year is that we're showing the carry forward amounts that relate to projects that require new additional funding, so that those projects, you can see how the new portion fits into the prior year amount. So overall, our capital budget without those carryover amounts is $9,340,000. And that's down from $10,161,000 in 2019, and down from $16,332,000 in 2018. So that's all funding sources, not just taxation. That's the full capital budget. I'll be the first to admit that numbers can be misleading, and that it certainly doesn't tell the whole story to pick out those numbers. But I think this is a relatively conservative budget. We are saving a lot of money for future projects, and as such, this year's request is not for huge dollars in historical terms. And again, that makes sense because we know we have some very large projects on the horizon. I'll touch on the reserve and reserve fund column that you see there. Just keep in mind that that can be a little deceiving. Sometimes it's pulling funds from an old reserve that last received funding, let's say 10 years ago. But sometimes the contributions into the reserve from the operating budget in the current year are enough to cover the amount that's being withdrawn, such as in the case of fleet. So it's just a little bit of semantics, but just keep in mind that not every reserve-funded project is necessarily depleting an unfillable reserve. Also in your package, we did include reserve and reserve fund activity and balances. They're in front of you in section 3.4. I'm certainly not going to go through each reserve, but I will just comment on them in general. Please take the projections with a grain of salt. They're mid-year numbers and they don't reflect mid-year project activity. But I think they are helpful to get a sense of the town's overall reserve position. It's substantial, but it's not necessarily where we would like it to be in all areas. You will notice that some project reserves, and I'll bring up I'll pick on the tourist camp reserve as an example. It has a number of projects this year that are crucial to updating and maintaining one of our key assets, and those projects exceeded what was available in the reserve. We made the decision that the most appropriate source of funding for tourist camp projects will always be the tourist camp reserve. As part of our full review of our reserve strategy and of our operating transfers, we will be focusing on a plan to more appropriately fund that reserve so that it returns to a positive balance and also has the right level of ongoing capital investment. And just another example of a similar concept is our Director of Protective Services has spoken on a few occasions about the plan to return the fleet reserve to a positive balance. So that's it for my remarks. I'll hand it back over, and again, thank you, and we'll get to the real discussion on each of the projects.
Thank you, Dan. So I guess we'll just go through these things one at a time and see if there's questions or comments. So we'll take the summary of the capital forecast. Councillor Grace?
I wasn't sure if, are we going to go through each page then? Because I've got a couple of questions based on Dan's comments.
So we can take any questions or comments with regard to the overview. My thinking is I'll just take 3.2, 3.3, 3.4 as we go through the agenda, and I'll just ask if there's questions or comments to any of those items. We'll just take as we go through the day. But we can start by, if there's any sort of general comments with regard to the overview, we can take those now, if there are any. Do you have some, Councillor Grace?
Well, I just had a question. Dan mentioned on the total, I think, if I got this right, that the 2020 total capital budget was $9 million something, but I don't see that here on the page that we have.
In my remarks there, I said 9,340,000, and that's without, in the summary that's in your package, there's, I think, 770,000 in carry forward amounts. So just in my remarks there, I stripped out that amount to come to the $9.3 million number.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions with regard to the overview? Don't see any. So how about the summary of the capital forecast, 5-year capital forecast? Any questions or comments about the capital forecast? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, and through you, we'll review each department's 5-year forecast when we get to those, though, correct?
We're taking each of these one at a time. Okay. The 2020 capital budget summary. Gotten in and out here for some reason. Don't see any. And the reserve and reserve fund balances. Yeah, am I at?
Can I just go back to the summary page and the example that Dan used with the tourist camp reserve being depleted, yet there's, what was it, $200,000 worth of projects in tourist camp? Is that going to be funded through borrowing then, or do we take from our legacy fund, or how do we bridge that gap between the what's in the reserve and the $200,000? And that's just an example, because it can be the same question can be asked for a number of them that are in the red. But seeing as how that's the one you used as an example, that's the one I'll ask.
Yeah, so we do have some reserves with a negative balance, and that's I'll say maybe historically somewhat abnormal, but certainly it has happened. Reserves, as a rule, don't necessarily accumulate interest or pay interest. So really, when we have a reserve and a negative balance, it's really just being funded by our other bank balances and reserve balances. So that's what allows us to do that. Certainly, we could never get to a position where our overall reserve balance is negative, but for smaller individual reserves, it's more than possible.
So essentially, we're just borrowing from ourselves in other reserves.
That's correct.
Okay, and just further on that comment, I think that our reserves are actually in interest-bearing accounts. So, but we often in the past 4 years we've come to a point where we had to make a decision as to whether to allow that reserve or the interest to build in the reserves, or whether to take that interest and use it for discrete projects along the way. And I don't think we've decided on that for this current year.
Yeah, so the reserve funds do accumulate interest. So at the last page of the reserve sheets has reserve fund balances. Those accumulate interest, and those certainly I don't think we'd ever allow those to go negative. But just normal reserves, such as the tourist camp reserve, there's no interest that accumulates, or there's no decision of what to do with that interest. The interest that's generated from those funds just goes to our corporate interest.
So Grace?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a follow-up on the tourist camp. So the operating budget for 2019 shows a $658,879 surplus for the tourist camps. Does some of that go into the reserve?
Yeah, so when I talked about reviewing our operating transfers, within the operating tourist camp budget, I think you'll see I think it's a $35,000 transfer into the reserve. So when I talk about reviewing our reserve strategy and our operating transfers and the plan to get that tourist camp reserve back to a positive balance, I'm talking about reviewing whether that $35,000 contribution needs to increase in the future.
And so the 20,000 surplus outside of the $35,000 transfer to the tourist camp reserve, does that just go into our general operating budget and isn't necessarily dedicated to tourist
That's correct.
expenditures?
Yeah, that's correct. It goes into our general surplus.
Thank you.
Further comments about the reserve fund balances, the Vice Deputy Mayor?
Oh, there it is. There it is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, this might be a question of our Mayor CAO, actually, Daniel. It's to do with the Building Department Operational Reserve, which at the end of 2020 is projected to be $1.2 million. I can remember the days where that was at $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. So, Mr. Mayor, maybe it's a question of you, your thoughts on this, but our CEO. But at what point do we make a decision where those reserve funds have to, can be spent? Do they always have to remain in the building reserve, or can we reallocate the building reserve fund, surplus funds, to other departments? Yeah, I'm just thinking that number is growing pretty significantly right now, and 2 or 3 years from now we could be at $2 million. So can we reallocate those funds and use elsewhere or not?
The CAO?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. No, we're not able to reallocate those funds. We collect them specifically for the building section. And as Dan's mentioned, our plan is to do a full review of all of our reserves and our reserve strategy, and that'll be one of them. And we'll determine the level that balance should be at. And when we for all of our reserves, when we determine that, we'll also determine funding strategies to either ramp up or ramp down.
So, I heard you correctly, we cannot reallocate.
That's correct. We can charge things to that reserve that support the building section. So their fleet, their vehicles, we can use money from that reserve to fund that. IT, but we couldn't take that money and build a swimming pool.
I guess, and I appreciate that question because it was one I had too. I have two questions on that line. One, the reserve transfer, at least I think that's intended to be the number in the 2020 operating budget, and the transfer into the building department reserve is $235. But I thought that the transfer in the operating budget was $360,000 to the reserve. Am I misremembering that? I thought there was a higher number than that. It's $800 and some odd thousand in income projected. The total income of the total cost is to run the department is $400 and change, and I think it was a $360,000 transfer in. I can't remember. Maybe you could take a look at that, and maybe I'm just misremembering. My other comment is, and I think that I agree that it was raised for building department and should stay in building services. I wonder if there's an opportunity, and it would be interesting for the administration to look at using this to fund our efforts in financing the community improvement plan for affordable housing. Can you, for example, issue grants for building permits against building permits from this fund? Things like that to finance our efforts on the CIP. We agreed at the last meeting to fund $90,000 or something toward that. It would be interesting to see if this fund could be used to offset that, if that meets the requirement of building services or not. So anyway, I'd be interested to hear the answer to that. I'm sure you're working on it, and we will see. Are there any other questions on the reserve funds? It doesn't look like it. The Vice
Mr. Mayor, I just have one more question. It's for you to the Director of Community Services, Jane. The reserve for the Port Elgin Tourist Camp is in a deficit position. We talked about that, and you mentioned it earlier, and I circled in here. There are 350 sites approximately at the Port Elgin Tourist Camp, Jane, roughly around 350, I think.
Port Elgin around there, yeah.
Port Elgin. So a $10 increase over and above what you projected in your operating budget would equate to about $35,000. So I'm just wondering, with the deficit position we're in, is there still room for discussion around increasing rates at the Port Elgin? We've already set our rates, I guess, at the last council meeting, didn't we? Okay. Because I think that deficit position we're in, we do, and Dan, you will come back with a report. So I guess we wouldn't be able to take a look at that, I guess, till the 2021 budget then, correct? Increasing those rates further to replenish that reserve? So it'd be a 2021 decision.
Council can review its rates anytime it wants, but we have set the rate,
and
right. So I think probably consistency would be the best approach at this point. Is there anything else on the reserve funds? If not, then we'll move on to the corporate services administration sections, and I guess does the Director of Corporate Services have some comments? The Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my capital projects are fairly not large this year. We have a couple of ones that are annual budgets that we use, and there's a couple of extra ones. Increasing the Wi-Fi points and dealing with the operating systems that our computers need to update. So.
Okay. All right. So we'll ask. What I'll do is I'll just take these one at a time, and we'll go through them. If there's nothing, then we'll just move on. So first off is under administration, the 5-year capital forecast. Any questions about that? Don't see any. There's the summary of the 2020 budget under administration. Questions, concerns? Councillor Mayette.
With the office furniture, does that include new chairs for council members? Because mine keeps sinking down here every time.
Well, typically,
Me too, so you can be level with me.
typically with that budget, we don't always have specific projects in place. We look at kind of our needs every year, so we can definitely keep that on the radar for you. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions about that item, the proposed office furniture? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you. So this shows for every year for the next 5 years. Is it anticipated that this will be at every year $10,000, $11,000 project?
Historically, we have spent. It varies from year to year, but we do typically spend in this area every year. It's typically not the full 10,000, but we do kind of leave it as needs arise, and it's not just as we. So we haven't planned specifically forward 5 years, but typically in every given year there are furniture requirements that we need. So
I guess with that is that, do we look at it that this is more maintenance than it is actually capital, and would you ever have the conversation about putting that into operations rather than capital?
It may be possible to put it into the operating budget if that's something that council's interested in from an accounting perspective, because it's above our we are allowed to pool items, and they do fall above our capital threshold. So I'm certainly comfortable with it being in the capital budget from an accounting perspective.
Thank you.
Anything else on that item? So that moves on to IT. The summary of the 5-year, questions about that? I don't see any. We can move then on to the items, the capital projects, the replacement computers. Any questions about that one? No. The Wi-Fi access points, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, Sue, the Wi-Fi access points, are they just in the administrative building, or are they throughout this building, the Coliseum, all the buildings?
It's the whole building, so we're looking at doing better through the whole building, so there's access points, not just here, but where the best points to put them are.
Further questions about the Wi-Fi access points? No. And then the final one, update Windows 7 to Windows 10. It's a shame. I really like Windows 7, but if there's nothing more on that, I did want to ask about on this question of IT, and it's something we've been talking about throughout the year. You know, it seems like we are now having, and may have to in the future, have more and more meetings in the Rotary Hall. And I just wonder, I think we've all noted the sort of the technological shortcomings of the Rotary Hall when it comes to having those kinds of meetings. And I wonder, has there been any consideration in corporate services from an IT standpoint about enhancing Rotary Hall in terms of internet connectivity, in terms of being able to live stream meetings from the hall? Also equipment to show PowerPoint presentations, that kind of thing. Are we thinking about that?
We haven't actually had any discussions on exactly what, if you wanted improvements or how it would work better. So that has not been built into the budget. But if you'd like, we can look into that. And
I think it would be worth doing because we are there's lots of stuff going on up there anyway. But we seem to be using the space lots for various kinds of meetings, and I think it'd be worth looking at. Is there anything else on IT? Don't see anything. Dave, would you just shut off your mic? Thanks. So that moves us then on to protective services and the director. Do you have comments on any of your items? Just want to go through them.
Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so the first is fire. There's a 5-year capital forecast for fire. Are there questions about that? Councillor Schreider.
Sorry, just one clarification. Phil, what's the reverse 911 notification system for 2021?
It's something we've been looking at for many years, and through our obligations to the Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan, the boundary for notification from the nuclear generating station keeps moving our way, and at some point, much like Kincardine, we may need to notify our residents in that area. North Bruce, the south edge of town. So it's something we've kept in the budget as a placeholder in case the province says we need to notify those people. And it's a system where we dial out to their cell phones and their home numbers and whatever they've registered for an evacuation.
Further comments on the fire 5-year capital? There's the one item there, the replacement of the thermal imaging cameras. Any concerns or questions about that? I don't see any. So then emergency operations. There's the 5-year capital forecast. Any questions on that one? I don't see any there. And there's one capital item, the emergency generator for the alternate EOC. Questions about it? Doesn't look like it. All right, so that moves us then on to fleet and the Director of Protective Services.
I could go through the project just quickly and answer any questions council might have. The first project is a pre-budget approval. Council gave permission to increase our fleet by 1 unit to keep up with growth, and it's a snowplow that's already been ordered. Next is a roadside gravel reclaimer. It's an attachment for a tractor which will help in maintenance.
If you're going to take them one at a time, why don't we just stop at each one and we'll see if there's any questions. So are there any questions on the single axle snowplow? No? And then the roadside gravel reclaimer? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an interesting looking piece of equipment. I've never seen one before. Is this used specifically for gravel roads only, or is it for banking up the shoulders on other roads?
Both. So it, as you know, roads slide off and it'll bring the gravel back up to the roadside when necessary.
Does it go right into the ditch? Because I notice a lot of the roads, especially where we apply the initial coating of the limestone gravel, the first couple plows, it all ends up in the ditch. Does it go right down, or is it just basically banking up the shoulder?
It's trying to bank back up the shoulder to the roadside.
Okay. Good. Bye.
Anything else on that one? I don't see anything. Carry on, Phil.
Third project is a single axle plow replacing an existing unit.
Councillor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Not a big deal, but why the difference in price?
Operations would like to try a little different style of wing. The adjustment for the wing and the plow, more hydraulic than mechanical, and it's something they want to explore and see if there's efficiencies in maintenance and everything there. So it's a little more modern version of the plow.
Further questions on it? Councillor Mayat.
Thank you. Is there a trade-in value on the old unit, and how does that factor in?
There is. So with all these fleet projects, we replace our existing unit. First, staff go out and explore the trade-in value, and we evaluate whether it's best to trade in. And most times we're seeing really good returns from an auction site, govdeals.com, and we have a couple assets listed there right now. Surplus our assets that way. That money comes back to the fleet reserve.
If there's nothing else on that, carry on.
Next project is a plate tamper used in construction, asphalt, and Public Works has rented one very, very often every year, and they want their own.
Questions on it? Nope. Carry on.
The excavator for the landfill is one we've had to push off for a couple of years, and it cannot be pushed off again. It's vital to the operations of the landfill, and hope council will support it.
Questions? No questions. Carry on.
The next I'll take a few minutes to describe. We've had a mini packer or a haul-all packer in service in the town of Saugeen Shores for about 5 to 6 years, and it's really come to the end of its life. It's a piece of equipment that's used heavily in the summer, and as council's aware, we're always challenged to keep up to garbage collection, and this is an efficient way to collect our not our residential garbage, but our garbage cans, our community garbage cans, and summer staff and community service staff work hard at it. This is an option we're bringing forth to council in trying to find those fleet efficiencies. The actual replacement cost of this is between $180,000 and $200,000 for a full brand new replacement, and we've sourced a refurbished unit from the City of Toronto, much newer than ours, that's been completely gone over, and we're looking to purchase the refurbished unit, far less cost, and get a 5 to 10 year lifespan out of that.
Questions about that, Councillor Schreier?
Thank you. Through you. Later on in the community services budget, maybe it's for Jane or Phil, where you have the in-ground garbage containers. I don't think we installed any this year, and I know that there is an option for some of these units to have the actual crane or the lifting device in order to do that. Is this unit that you're looking at having that? Because we are going to install more of these in-ground garbage cans, I guess.
Yeah, that is correct. The unit that we have sourced doesn't have it on it now, but it has the option to add it if and when we get those units in the ground.
Anything else on that? Next.
This is a service van used by community services for all of our buildings. It takes tools and staff safely to their workplace.
Questions on it? Seeing none, carry on.
Next is replacing one of our many mowers. It's a zero turn, used several spots in the town.
Questions on the mower? I don't see any. Carry on.
Next is another mower. It's an attachment for our tractors, used in large open areas, ballparks, that kind of thing. It's a gang mower replacing the existing.
Questions on that? What's next?
Next is a golf cart, sort of. A utility cart, may be better word for it, used at the harbor, go back and forth from the north and south sides, and garbage removal and staff use it at the harbor, replacing existing.
Okay, any questions on that? What's the last one?
The final project for fleet is a Mark Cruiser for the police services. They had an engine failure of an existing cruiser, so that replaces that frontline Mark Cruiser.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Phil, that 5-year-old vehicle, and it was an engine failure. How many kilometers were on that? Just curious.
It's actually listed on GovDeals right now, and it's between 200 and 300,000. I think it's closer to 300,000.
Any other questions on the police cruiser, Councillor Schreider?
Not specifically to the police cruiser, but maybe one in general. I think in future years it would help to have either run times, like hour logs on the mowers or the kilometers for vehicles for some of these as well, just to see, when you have just a summer vehicle, obviously we don't have to trade it in as often. The kilometers are a little bit lower, but on other vehicles, like a police vehicle, they get a lot more use. So that would just be helpful from my standpoint.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, Vice Deputy Mayor.
Back to the Director of Community Service for a second. That 2002 van we're replacing. So we get 16, 17 years out of that van? Then? Is that 2002 van being taken off the road? Is that what you're saying? So 17 years it lasted?
I'll remind Council that optimum from other models, fleet models we looked at across the province, bigger centres, 7 years is the optimum replacement schedule for value of fleet. So we're a little bit behind in that one, but it's time.
Okay. If there's nothing further on the fleet, and it doesn't look like there is, then we'll move on to police services. And do you have any comments, Chief?
Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So the first there is the summary of capital projects, and we'll just take the whole thing all together. There's the one item there, the handheld radar. Are there any questions or comments with regard to any part of the police capital lines? Doesn't look like it. I guess you're off the hook, Chief. So that moves us on to community services, and the first item, parks, and the Director of Community Services.
Yeah, I think I'll just provide a general comment before we start into the community services operation. Our capital budget. The capital budget really identifies maintenance and enhancements to our existing features within community services, and being sympathetic to the AODA requirements that we follow and abide by through the accessibility plan on an annual basis. The outstanding large capital items identified in the 5-year capital budget, as Dan indicated, are in somewhat placeholders. Amounts may fluctuate as we get closer to those years and do future investigations, but I just wanted to identify some of the larger items that are seen within all of the 5-year capital budgets. And those include the pool, which are drawings, and the actual build of a YMCA is acknowledged within the 5-year capital budget. Lamont Sports Park, there for 2025 or 2021, there is a placeholder identified in there as well. The Coliseum roof will be coming along shortly. Electrical upgrades at the tourist camp. Dock replacement, as I shared that information with you previously. Waterfront enhancements show on an annual basis as a phased-in approach, and the continued improvements to the Southampton Town Hall. So I just wanted to identify those to you before we started.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll start with parks then, and we have the summary of the 5-year capital there. Questions? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, maybe Frank can answer this question. I'm just wondering, it's nice to see those 3 playgrounds being replaced, and they're very much needed. Pearson, Nodwell, Waterloo, I see $206,000. Just to confirm, there are no consulting fees allocated to that 206,000 all be done internally?
No, we're not including consulting fees in this, but we feel that this would be a prime candidate for an ad hoc committee to work through through these projects. And further within the capital projects, I'll talk about park enhancements at the tourist camp. So through economies of scale, we would consider tendering these all at the same time.
So Jane, a follow-up question I had about the ad hoc. I'm just wondering, it goes a few years back, but we had a very successful neighborhood discussion up at Cameron Park, where I think 15, 20, 30 people showed up to a neighborhood meeting to say, here's what we would like to see in our neighborhood for a playground. And would you entertain that idea? I know the ad hoc is a good idea, but is there some discussion around getting neighborhood groups together at all for these three areas to say, here's what we'd kind of like to see? It's a one-night meeting thing for an hour and a half on site, and just to say, here's what we like to see for our community playground. Are you thinking about that at all?
Yes, certainly. We have some good experience in history with doing projects like that. Probably more recently would be Jubilee Park as well, which we took that type of approach to.
Good. That's a good thing. And maybe, Mr. Mayor, through you to, whether maybe Amanda can ask this, it is related to parks, the Lamont Sports Park. There was a few questions I had about that particular site. And maybe Amanda can answer these for me. Where are we at with the rezoning application for Lamont Sports Park? Is it reasonable to expect that the site would be ready by this summer or fall to allow for starting construction for Lamont Sports Park? And are materials still being removed from the site, or is the gravel, the former owner, has all the gravel been removed that's to be removed? So basically, where are we at with rezoning, getting the site ready for construction, and removal of gravel? So someone can answer that. Maybe Amanda, do you want to answer that question for me about officially closing it?
Thank you, and through, I guess, double through Jane and through the mayor on this one. The Sutherlands is working on taking their stuff off. They had just taken their last pile of pea gravel. The material that's left there now is for us to use. So we haven't surrendered the license yet so that we can continue to use that granular A that's on that site. Once the license is surrendered, that material has to stay. So there's a bit of good gravel that we wanted to take off for this fall, so we'll continue to work with Sutherlands to have the license surrendered over the winter, and at that same time, we'll do the official plan amendment. We can't change the official plan designation from aggregate until the license is surrendered, but that's on schedule to be done in the spring and in time to start construction for you in the summer or fall.
So it's reasonable to expect we could be ready by summer, fall to start construction?
Yes, if you give us a date that you want the machines on site, we'll make sure
okay.
that is.
That's great, Amanda. Thank you.
All right, so we're still focused on the 5-year forecast. Are there any more questions about that? I guess just on the 5-year forecast and the numbers in there for the Lamont Sports Park at this point, I just lost it because I was just there, but it was $1 million next year. There it is, yeah, $1 million in 2021 in the forecast, but that's considered in addition, I assume, to the $1.6 million that was funded in 2018. Is that right?
Correct, and as I said before, that's merely a placeholder. We have not seen completed designs as of yet. We do not have a business plan as yet, and or a fundraising campaign. So.
But the approved borrowing from 2018 remains in place.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else on the 5-year forecast? If I don't... the Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jane. Helliwell Park, we've been talking about getting washrooms there for years, but I see we don't have that scheduled until 2023. I think that's one of the main drawbacks of our girls' teams playing at Helliwell, and Helliwell is a fantastic park. Is there any way of having that move forward? Because that is, as I said, one of the drawbacks. It is one of the premier pitches in the area, but we can't use it because there are no washroom facilities.
We can certainly move that forward, and at the time, at the appropriate time, we'll discuss that with council and make sure it makes sense on the year that you would like to see it.
Councillor Schreider?
Thank you. Through you. Jane, I know we'll be getting a report for the existing ball diamonds from the consultant that will be coming through. We don't show any money in 2020 for any remedial action on those diamonds. Should we be showing some funds for that, because we will be getting a kind of a report card essentially on our diamonds?
Correct. There is nothing showing in 2020, and again, we do have the 1.6 million that's debt financed. If at such time in 2020 that council deems it worthy to be on the books, I'll say, again, it would be through debt financing, and that doesn't necessarily need to come up during budget deliberations. That can come up at any course of the year. Again, it's dependent on what results come from the consultant, and again, what this council deems that they want to proceed is in their first year and then in their second year.
Just to follow up with that, but the 1.6 that's already approved is for the Lamont Sports Park, correct?
Correct.
And so any maintenance or recommendations that we need to carry out to make our existing diamonds safe and playable, we don't have funds for that.
Correct. They're not showing until 2021, and again, until we get the results from the report from the consultants, we really don't know what we're going to put into 2020.
The CAO?
I just want to comment that if a consultant said that something wasn't safe, we do have funds in our operating budget. There's nothing to suggest at this point that would be a recommendation, but if it was, we would certainly respond to that.
Okay, so if there's nothing, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And Jane, could you give me provide some detail for council in terms of shop improvements, what the scope of work, where we're spending $30,060?
Just on the 5-year capital, can we, we'll just make our way through down to the proposed capital projects. We'll just work our way through them, just so we can keep this organized. I don't want to bounce around too much. So if there's nothing further on the 5-year capital, then we'll take our way into those proposed capital projects. And the first one is bike amenities, racks, and service stations. Any questions with regard to that? I don't see any. So then the replacement of the existing playground units. We already had a comment from the Vice Deputy Mayor on that. Are there further comments about those? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, and through you. So it lists 3 parks here. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so the $206,000, is that for full replacements on one of them or all of them, or just component replacements, Jane?
At this point, we're looking at component replacements for 2 of the parks that we've had to close off some certain aspects of those parks. We want to go through an RFP process to see, again, as I stated before, economies of scale, what would be the best buck we can get, what's the best equipment we can get for that dollar figure. If we can replace all 3, we certainly would like to. We've identified $206,000 for 3 parks. Until we open up an RFP to see what we can get, it's difficult at this point. Again, without having a lot of that background information, we're making some assumptions that these are the 3 prime parks that need to be replaced based on our review of those parks. So we'd like to get as much as we can out of that amount of dollars. It will be through a competitive process, obviously.
Anything else on the playground equipment? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, are there any, and I don't believe I've seen in this package, any inclusion, of new parks, perhaps in the forecast? Was there, I know that we just discussed that, but can you?
There's no additional parks to our existing inventory included in the budget.
Anything else on that? All right, then the in-ground waste containers. Questions with regard to that item? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, and through you, we didn't install the ones for 2019, is that correct?
They're sitting at our shop, they just came in.
Okay. Were we going to do 2019 as a trial period, though, and now we're being asked to approve ones in 2020? Because we haven't installed those before, I think.
We have 18 sitting up at the shop right now that when we discuss with staff, we'd like to install the 18 this spring coming up, live with that throughout the course of the summer and see, make sure they make sense where they are and that they're the correct size. So our trial would be the summer of 2020, and at such time come fall, we'd like to proceed with the next phase.
So how much per unit are they? We have 18 of them.
It depends what size. When I say 18, those are 3 or 4 different sizes that we've acquired.
Fair enough.
And again, it's dependent on the traffic flow, the usage, the location. There's a number of variables.
So we're being asked to fund phase 2 here, but phase 2 will only happen if phase 1 works out.
Correct, and it'll be fall.
Councillor Carr.
Yes, thank you, and through you. Jane, I'm just curious, have we seen any costing as far as how we're going to manage dumping these things now? As I know we alluded to with the used truck, it's going to require some kind of hydraulic crane setup type thing or a manual crane. I did see something mentioned to that too, but is there going to be specialized training that only certain people are going to be allowed to do this? Do we have the infrastructure in place to change these already? I know we did say last year to try these things, but I still hadn't seen anything come back on that.
Yeah, so 2 questions there. We do have a garbage crew that's trained in the removal of garbage, delivery to the landfill site, when they should be in certain areas, when they shouldn't be, based on demand and pedestrian traffic in those areas. As far as removal of these of the components of these garbage cans, when we first looked into it, we were looking at a winch at the end of our 1-ton truck. With the purchase of the new mini packer, it has the capabilities of providing the equipment required to remove the garbage as well. So staff will go through that training component to remove that garbage through that process.
Sorry, just to follow up. So then, are we looking at maybe the job title of the person that's allowed to do it? Are you looking at an operator once they're starting to use equipment and things like that, or no?
No, it's minimal equipment. We have, I'll say, more mature garbage collectors in our student staff, and we have an adult that oversees that crew as well. So through that combination, we feel confident that we can certainly complete this task in a safe and efficient manner.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rich.
You through Mr. Mayor. So I remember when we initially talked about these that there was going to be a significant savings in operations costs. Is that the case? That's why we were going over to this design, because they wouldn't have to go through as often?
Not so much a significant savings, but efficiencies in what we do and the number of times we can collect the garbage within areas that are highly populated. So as an example, harbor areas, our beaches, where we still have to collect the garbage, but we can be a little bit more selective to when we collect the garbage, so we can avoid those times when beaches are at their prime, so to speak. So yes, there will be a reduction in the number of times we collect garbage. Absolutely, that's our intention, and we'll certainly change the method and when we collect our garbage within those areas. So again, it's our first year. It's a pilot. As pilots, we work through our aches and pains through that process to determine where the real efficiencies are and if there is a savings as well.
Right, I appreciate that. And I guess the point of my saying that was is there any way, I'd be interested to hear how we're going to track that, to track whether or not this is a successful program.
Certainly we'll track it as we do now with everything we do. We have a service analysis documentation that we use for ourselves for when we collect garbage, when we clean washrooms. We'll add that to our list as well and keep track of all of that.
Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is the cost of installing these containers included in the $20,000? It doesn't seem like much if you have to dig a hole and do some construction work.
It is included, and we'll use the back truck for installation.
Further comments on that? If not, there's the last one, shop improvements. Vice Deputy Mayor?
Same question, Dean. I just was wondering about the details of that expenditure for shop improvements, and a little higher level. I'm just wondering what you're about to explain to me. Has your department talked about, like, when Lamont Sports Park becomes operational in 2 or 3 years from now, 2 or 3 years from now, let's say, are the plans to have a community services workshop at that location? Is that the plan? Like the future of Arlington and River Market Street workshop? Have your staff talked about what the future holds for that piece of land up there, Jane? Will our operations remain there, or are you planning to move it out to Lamont?
At the Lamont Sports Park, we certainly have talked about the operations, but more of a satellite location for the operations for that specific park, not for overall operations of community services.
So for the time being, that's going to stay?
Correct.
Great. Okay. What does that cost include for maintenance and repairs?
Well, I was very specific when I provided the information for you that future requests will come to council, because there is a bit of work that needs to occur up there. more aesthetics than anything else for the benefit of our neighbors. It isn't the most pleasing looking shop there is right now. We know the fence needs to be replaced. That's something we'd like to consider for this year. And we've got some issues with the building itself, with the entrance ways, a little bit more safety issues. Those are two that we would like to do first. Future, certainly some roof repairs. We know we need to do some painting on some of those buildings. Not that community services necessarily uses all those buildings up there. They're used amongst other departments, but they certainly need to have some painting done, resurfacing of the parking lot eventually. There's a number of items that we have on our list.
It's great to hear about the painting, Jane. I know the residents across the road over the years have made comment that could make it a little more aesthetically pleasing to look across. So it's good to hear that some painting might be in the works there.
Anything further on the shop improvements? I don't see anything, so that brings us to the end of parks and takes us on to tourist camps and the 5-year capital forecast for tourist camps. Are there questions with regard to that? Councillor Grace.
Sorry, I need to talk about the next one, not the 5-year forecast, just a specific about one.
Okay, are there anything on the 5-year forecast before we move on to the items? I don't see anything, so we can go on then to the proposed capital projects, and the first one, the Southampton washroom refurbishment. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is just clarification. Are both the bathrooms, washrooms at camps 2 and 3 proposed to be refurbished in Southampton?
Correct.
Is it both of them?
Correct.
Okay. And the roof is for which one?
Sorry?
The roof
That's
replacement?
for Port Elgin.
Okay, thanks.
The Deputy Mayor. Your mic's not on there, Donnie.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at the tourist camps, it's always an issue looking at what we need to do to keep them up to grade, to make them accessible for everybody. I think we need to really create an ad hoc committee that looks at this and creates and community service does a great job with this, but an ad hoc committee that looks at these, because when the ball report comes back and there may be some suggestions made with that, but I think if we created an ad hoc committee to look at that and create a plan in looking at something like the Southampton washroom refurbishment, total cost of $113,000. We know that the new facility that we took down to Lakeview Park was in that same ballpark of cost, but I think it would be more usable and better for the residents of the park. So just a thought, but I think we should discuss this at a later date and bring that forward, and I think we'd really do a better service to our tourist residents, our summer residents.
Okay. Further comments on that? I don't see any mention in there, Jane, I'm sure it's your plan, but maybe you could just confirm that it is about the AODA standards. Is the intent to refurbish these to meet those standards? I assume it is.
Yes, anytime we do a renovation, we need to be compliant with AODA.
Excellent, thank you. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And Jane, this is through you to Jane. Can you tell me what the cost was of the new facility down at Lakeview?
I want to say 119, but, oh, sorry, 150. That was with the deck included around it.
So at 150, and we've got 113, would it not be better to look at something like that right now? It provides more washroom facilities, more shower facilities, up to date.
So with those two camps, we recently replaced the roofs with steel roofs, so they've both been replaced at this point. They're not as large washrooms as what we would have at the Port Elgin Tourist Camp. They're a much smaller one. We certainly can, but they're solid buildings right now. There was many issues with the Port Elgin Tourist Camp why we replaced that entire building. These ones are still strong buildings. They've got new roofs on them. They need to be gutted on the interior. If it's council's wish that we replace them totally, we can certainly look into a price for that.
So inside them, how many washrooms are there and how many showers are there?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Sorry, I'm referring to this. Oh, the Southampton.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to. I don't know between the two of them. I'm thinking 4, but I'd get back to you on that.
Thank you.
4 stalls, 2 showers, I suspect, but.
Anything further on the washroom refurbishment? I don't see anything. So the roof replacement. Questions or comments to that item? I don't see any there. So playground equipment. Questions or comments with regard to that? I don't see any. And I just had this thing flash out. The last item is what? I've lost it here. Steps to the beach. Questions or comments with regard to the steps to the beach, the Vice Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, this is our last item for tourist camps I see. I'm just wondering, under the estimated reserve fund balances, it shows an $81,000 deficit at the end of 2020. And it shows $205,000 in preliminary capital budget items, $205,000. And on the sheets, I'm seeing $179,600 in funding, Jane. So I don't understand. What am I missing? I'm missing a number. So on the reserve, it shows $205,000 in spending, which would take us to an $81,000 reserve deficit by the end of 2020. And on page, are they numbered? Yeah, 50, we show $179,600. So I don't understand the difference between $205,000 and $179,600. What am I missing?
We'll give it to the treasurer.
I'll certainly look into that. That may be an error from a late change in a funding amount or something like that. So I'll look into that and get back to you.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, I don't know whether I'm not convinced that we should be moving forward with all of these projects and ending up in an $81,000 deficit to our reserve for the tourist camps by the end of 2020. I think I would prefer that we take a look at our, I know we've just approved our fees, but for 2021 we'll be looking at our fees, obviously, no doubt raising them to the point where we have to pay down that operating deficit to our reserves. So I guess I'm having difficulty with spending these amount of dollars, $205,000 worth, or $179,600, whatever it is, and creating a further deficit to a reserve. So I just think I'm just wondering what projects. I guess I'm going to ask the Director of Community Services question then. You've got them in here for 2020, Jane, but are any of these projects able to be deferred to 2021?
I guess we put them all in there because they're all priority to us, and these are the ones that we hear from our campers the most. Typically, we regularly get comments about the condition of our washrooms, and they get deferred a number of times. When we talk about amenities in the park, there's very limited amenities in this park when we look at some of these surrounding parks. So playground equipment is another one that we hear from young families. There isn't a lot of amenities in the parks. With the steps leading to the beach, this is the only safe access for patrons to get to the beach. There is no sidewalk on that south side of Green Street. Currently they're coming out, they're walking down the hill and trying to cross a busy Green Street to get to the beach. The set of steps are very well used, and hence they're in the budget as well.
I guess for me, if I had seen this number before operations, I probably would have been in favor of raising fees at tourist camps another $10 or $20 per year to create another $70,000. $20 increase would be $70,000, would almost pay for the operation deficit. So I think this was a little bit backwards. I think that I'm not in favor of running into a further deficit with our reserve account, and the bills aren't basically getting paid by our residents at the tourist camp. So anyways, Mr. Mayor, that's my comment.
I think it's important to remember that this is a significant profit center to the municipality, right? $650,000 a year profit center. And our investments in one way are offset by that income. And it's not unusual for us to drive a reserve into deficit for a period of time to finance needed investments and then recoup that in later years. We've done it at the harbor, and which is a much less profitable profit center than the tourist camp. and then recover it in future. We have to be cautious that we don't, that we keep improving the facility in a way that maintains it as a profit center without overburdening those people who are paying the bills there, right, and actually contributing, nearly, $650,000 to the operations of the municipality. So, I think we have to just be. I think we would be. I'm not concerned about going into deficit for 1 year. I mean, if it becomes a routine thing, then maybe we have to look at it. But the other thing too is that we're likely going to be making some changes to some of these tourist camps in the coming couple of years, potentially, based on recommendations from other projects. And I think all of that combined, there'll be lots of opportunity to talk about this and proceed in the manner of some sort of plan. But I hate to just always be so concerned about maintaining that reserve balance and driving up fees to do that, because I think that could bite us in the end.
So just a final comment then. Based on what you just said, the $650,000 profit, I agree. It's a substantial amount. $2,600 per year. Heat, hydro, water included is still a very good rate. And I just think that adding another $20 to the tourist camp operation, I wish I had known this before, because I would have been proposing that the rates, instead of increasing $50 a year, would increase $70 a year to bring our reserve balance almost to zero. So that's my comment. I don't support. I don't agree with you, Mr. Mayor, on that. I think that the tourist camp should be paying the bills. So that's my comment.
Yeah, and important to remember the taxpayer isn't funding any of this, so they still are. Councillor Grace.
I just wanted to add that actually the projected surplus for 2020 for the tourist camps is $678,000.
Further comments about the tourist camps? Councillor Schreider.
Just one clarification. Here it says a previously requested capital reserve exists for the design of the steps in 2018. So was the design complete, or the design is not complete, and how much was that?
So we had completed designs for the steps further to the south, which was our specific request. The expense is, because they're more of a, I'll say, complicated step where there's lots of turns in it, it's not just a matter of replacing it as we see fit. It has to be engineered. The price is considerably higher than originally anticipated, and therefore we feel that these steps are more in line, more are far busier step than the ones further south, and should be replaced prior to the ones to the south. So there is some funding previously from 2018 for engineering, which will be allocated to this cost as well.
So the $25,000 that's being requested here is for engineering?
Construction.
Is for construction of them.
Correct.
Further questions about the tourist camps? If not, nope, Councillor Mayette.
Yeah, with regards to those steps, two questions really. Are we looking at doing like a like replacement with railway tie construction, or we get some more modern technology going in there? And then another one to follow up.
More modern technology, cognizant of animals being used on those steps as well, and making sure that the step themselves is a wood process, and the sides would probably be aluminum.
Right, okay. I recall a few years ago we were talking about a similar set of steps over at Scubby's Point in Southampton, and it was deferred, or just, it was, I guess, not done because the rationale at the time was that if we refurbish those steps, we have to make them accessibility compliant. That is not the case for these. Is that right?
That's not the case, because there's alternative access to the beach, which would be down Green Street for those with mobility issues if they chose not to do these steps.
Yeah. So there's no accessibility component to this?
Not with these steps, no.
Okay.
Anything else with regard to the steps or the tourist camps? If not, then that moves us on to 8.3, the harbor. And you've got the 5-year capital forecast for the harbor. Are there any questions or comments with regard to that? I don't. So, Councillor Schreider.
Through you, the dock replacement design for 2021, where exactly is that? I know it would be on the north side of the harbor, but and even the same comment maybe with extension of the parking lot as well, is that it doesn't give a lot of detail of where these projects are taking place, and just a little bit more detail to make it clear. So the dock replacement
So the dock
design
replacement is on the north side
for all of
the harbor?
those,
Correct.
and that's just for the design. 2 million is the design,
2 million is construction, design and construction.
and the parking lot one. Sorry, Jane.
Sorry, and the parking lot is for the expansion of the North Shore parking lot. That may, and again, conversations with staff is that may change into an alternative entrance into the North Shore parking lot as opposed to where the entrance currently is. So again, they're merely placeholders for consideration in the future.
Okay, anything else on the 5-year forecast for Harbour? Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Jane, just going back to that design question, I wasn't clear from your answer. Is the 2 million for design or construction and design?
Sorry, it's for both. And that was identified, you may recall, in the 2017 Harbor Report that was presented to Council.
Anything else on that? If not, there's the one item there, the roof on the Harbour office. Any questions about that? I don't see any, so that moves us on to Waterfront and the 5-year capital forecast for Waterfront. Questions about that? Oh, Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not really a question. I just want to thank the Southampton Rotary for their donation. They donate so many things to improve our recreation and infrastructure, and this is a donation of a Moby mat to create an accessible boardwalk to be used at Pioneer Park for events that need to access the waterfront. And so I just want to thank Southampton Rotary for, again, being very generous.
Yeah, it's a great donation. Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you, just the second item listed on the 5-year in 2021, Harbour Street south of Green Street. I'm curious as why this would be on the waterfront budget, not in engineering. And was this already one that was pre-approved maybe last year and then it's being carried forward for a couple of years?
You are correct, and this one is a combination between community services and infrastructure and development. The reason why we're showing it on the waterfront budget is because from the intersection of Harbour and Green to the south, looking at expansion of parking and additional parking that would accommodate for the waterfront. So it could show in either budgets, but we're showing it in this budget.
Good, thank you.
I think that this was part of the design in the 2014 waterfront, Port Elgin waterfront redesign, so that's probably why it ended up here. It's part of that overall vision. Any other questions about the 5-year forecast for waterfront? There is the one item, the councillor or the deputy mayor. Sorry,
Mr. Mayor. This is just Jane. The South Street Beach Washroom 2022. Where are we looking at locating that?
We're not looking at a spot right now. Again, it's merely a placeholder for consideration to investigate as we get closer to that year. We don't have a location determined at this point, but it's certainly something we want to consider and look at if there is a possibility that we can accommodate one there.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, Jane, in 2022, parking east of Harbour, can you just explain that one?
If memory serves me correctly, that may be cleaning up the area along the Harbour Street, along the harbour itself, to the east of the harbour. So where individuals park now just off the road, which is not necessarily defined, it would be cleaning up that area so that we can accommodate additional vehicles along that area. If memory serves me correctly, I'd have to go back and look at those individual phases more closely.
Anything further on that forecast? I think with an item like that South Street Beach Washroom, if 2022 is really the target date that you're looking at, I think you need to, the administration should have the conversation about really working back a couple of years to start your planning on projects like that, right? I mean, realistically, if you don't come to council till 2022 for the funding, and that's where the conversation starts, it's really a 2024 project. because it'll take that long to get it going and to find a place and go through the consultation, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're going to need a couple of years on new projects like that to get them up and running. So it would be interesting, I think, and I'm sure it's a discussion you're having about these capital forecasts, but I think that you need to, if you're giving us dates or putting dates, you should look back a couple of years, come forward a couple of years and start discussing how you're going to plan for them and head towards these dates for funding, just so that we're clear on when these things might actually occur. If there's nothing further then on the 5-year capital, there is the MobiMat project there, and we heard from Councillor Grace on that, a great donation item from Rotary. If there's anything else, the Vice Deputy Mayor?
I just want to compliment, thank you for your comments, Councillor Grace. It's, I'm just wondering, Jane, the mats, we've heard people in the community over the years ask for those along our waterfront. Had your staff thought at all about Gobles Grove or Port Elgin Beach or any other area? That's a donation, obviously, but had you as a department thought about putting monies, I see it's not here, but dollars for that?
We've certainly had lots of conversations about the benefits of MobiMat versus the benefits of what we existing have with our wooden boardwalks that we've either made in-house or we've made with the help of SDSS and Bud Help, and conversations as well with our deputy clerk, who is obviously on the Accessibility Advisory Committee. The wooden boardwalks that we prepare and have out on the waterfronts is a better, robust, and I'll say safer and more easier way to get individuals with mobility issues to the waterfront as opposed to the MobiMats. The MobiMats aren't necessarily flat. They have contours to how the waterfront is, but in areas where they're needed for short term, they make sense. It makes better sense right now to continue with the wooden boardwalks that we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
I think this will be a good trial because we have heard back and forth about the usability of the MobiMat, so it'll be good to try it once and see how it works before we go farther. Anything else on that? If not, then that moves us on to the Coliseum, and there's the 5-year capital forecast there. Are there questions on the 5-year capital forecast? The Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, Jane, the compressor replacement that was put off from last year, do we have it still on the books to be coming up very shortly?
Yeah, we chose to put that, to delay that till spring when the floor replacement was completed, so that will be replaced in the spring.
Okay. Anything further on the 5-year capital forecast? I don't see anything. So there's the proposed capital projects there. The first one is cleaning and painting the steel. Questions or comments about that? Don't see any. There's the spectator heating, something that'll make my wife very happy. Any questions or comments about that? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, obviously we can all acknowledge that the Coliseum is a rather cold spectator viewing area. However, I've heard mixed reviews on spectator heating. Do we have any benchmarking, perhaps, of existing or newly installed heating that may prove this as worthy?
Yeah, we work closely with ORFA and SWORFA, which are two organizations. Some of the conversations we've had with them recently is there seems to be all over there's different kinds of benchmarks for when to turn it on, as an example, and something we'll certainly consider. We'll have to come up with our own policy. It won't just be on all the time. It'll make sense when it is turned on. Those that do have it speak highly of it. It has the capability of if there's 4 units there, we can only have 3 units on if we want, depending on the number of spectators in the area, and which makes sense. It also kind of helps with cleaning up the bleachers too. If we we keep it down to one area, then it keeps the spectators in one area as well. But no, we haven't had, with our journeys and conversations, we have not had any issues from other communities indicating that they're an issue.
And any risk to the condition of the ice? I've heard complaints from other facilities who've used heaters that it causes so much warmth that it causes inconsistencies in the ice. Certainly not my area of expertise.
That may be defaults with the design in that particular facility. we've already reached out to a number of companies that installs these, and we've got some good advice from them as well. So,
further questions on the spectator heating item? No. Facade and change room design, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, I know you and I have talked about this many times, so we're looking at putting up a plan to look at a new creation of a new front of the Coliseum facade, because basically it's crumbling down. We've got to do something with it. And our dressing rooms, would that be looking at the creation of maybe a new build on the side for 6 new dressing rooms to go out flat out onto the ice surface and use the previous dressing rooms as storage?
certainly we'll gather some input from our users in the facility to see what makes sense. Facade is priority to us right now, and secondary would be the change rooms and expansion out to that area, and storage, which we have very limited access to storage. So certainly some input from the public and our users will be considered as we work through this process.
That's good, because our dress rooms are not accessible. Our handicap washroom needs work. So I'd really like to see, as we've talked previously, looking at that new dressing room design, and I know you've been actively looking at grants and money that we can find to do that. So I look forward to your report.
Yeah, I think it's important to know we've just put $1 million into the Coliseum. It's going to be a facility we're going to keep for a while now, and its front facade is not accessible in any way that we would define as acceptable in 2019. So we're going to have to be prepared to spend more money on it to bring it up to the standard we need today. Not forgetting the sort of I think and maybe you can comment on this, Jane. I like when you read facade, you think aesthetics, but this is not really an aesthetic, or shouldn't at least, I think, be limited to an aesthetic improvement of the front, although it could use that. But the primary goal is to make sure that you can get into the building accessibly, that it has the space inside the front vestibule for accessibility and for the kind of viewing standards we need, and then also to get a design for the change rooms and whatnot that we could eventually build to make those accessible as well. That's the intent, I assume.
That is the intent, and part of that is from a maintenance perspective as well, and we know the condition of the sidewalk in front of the Coliseum right now is not desirable and it's not safe, and so we start to have those conversations of in-ground heating as well. Salt and sand play a tremendous amount and an impact to those facilities. What if we had in-floor heating could reduce that snow melt? So lots of discussions throughout this process for sure.
Okay, good. If there's nothing further on the Coliseum facade, then there's the last one there, the door replacement. Any questions about that? Oh, the Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. This goes beyond the door replacement. As you just said, we just put $1 million into the Coliseum. It's here for a while. The one big lack at the Coliseum is the Wi-Fi serviceability, because it is the major hub for summer activities, leisure fair, hobbycraft fair, all that stuff, and the Wi-Fi accessibility is not there for the vendors that come in, for the people that are being there. Is there any way, have you thought of how we can increase the Wi-Fi accessibility in the Coliseum annex areas to make them usable for all the people that rent the building and use the building in the summertime?
We can certainly bring a report back to Council for information.
The Vice Deputy Mayor?
Mayor, just before we move on from the Coliseum, I'd just like to publicly acknowledge efforts of, we're very fortunate to have Steve Hardy on our staff now from North Perth, came to us from as Director of Community Services down there and was project manager for the Coliseum, $1.1 million project. And I think it came within, our CAO likes to say this a lot, I know, and it's a good one, on time, on budget. And I think that budget was like within $1,000 of a $1.1 million budget. So I know Steve's here today, not to embarrass him too much, but he did a great job, and Jane, your staff, all your staff did a really good job on the Coliseum project. So just want to say thank you, Steve, for your great efforts. Yep.
Very good. Anything further on the Coliseum? If not, the complex. So we have the summary, the 5-year capital for the community complex. Any questions or comments to that? Excuse me. Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you. The Rotary Hall flooring in 2024, is that replacing the flooring up there, Jane?
Yes, that's replacing the floor. It's showing a number of cracks in it right now through settlement, so at some point that floor needs to be replaced. So we've identified that as a long-term project.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Don't see anything, so that moves on to the capital items under the complex, and there's two: Rotary Hall kitchen enhancements and LED interior lights retrofit. Anything on the kitchen enhancements? Councillor Schreider?
Through you, just looking for exactly what the 77,000 would cover.
The picture on top shows a recently completed arena facility. So the $77,000 is for design. It's also for complete replacement of a majority of the items that you see in there, other than the stove would remain. What our goal is to have really everything on wheels. So reduce all of the cupboards that are up there right now, which really are not commercial cupboards. We've had to accommodate over the years the heavy weight within those cupboards, but everything would be on wheels and everything would be stainless steel.
The Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would that also be the replacement of the plates and glasses?
No, plates and glasses are still in relatively good shape, but it certainly would be replacement of what they would be on wheels, dollies, I'll say for lack of a better word, which makes it a little bit easier for groups that are preparing meals in there, but it also makes it easier for our staff cleaning the facility. We can wheel everything out, give it a thorough cleaning, and wheel everything back in.
Anything further on the kitchen enhancement? Do we actually have failed equipment in there? Like, is there stuff that's not working that needs to be replaced, or is the space still functional in terms of its purpose?
The equipment that we have in there right now, the dishwashers are working relatively well. The stove is in great shape too. Through the process of bringing in a consultant, they'll help us design that area so that it makes sense. So does it make sense where they currently are? I can't answer that question right now, but that's why we're going to bring the expertise in. We'll also reach out to some of the groups and organizations that have prepared meals in that space to see, to get some recommendations from them as well.
My question is just, I guess, going to the question as to whether this is an absolutely critical project in 2020, or is it, is it a nice to have rather than an essential upgrade at this point in time?
The facility's 20 years old. Certainly, out of any complaints we get upstairs, it's typically the condition of the kitchen itself. As much as staff cleans it on a regular basis, we still continue to get remarks about the condition of it. Staff alone with the cupboards themselves, if you've been up there, you'll know that they're not commercial grade, that they're the residential grade, and for many years there have been bows in that the cupboard space where we've had to reduce the number of equipment that we have in there, plates and cutlery, because of the sheer weight of them.
Okay, so if there's nothing further on the kitchen, then there's the LED interior light retrofit for the Plex. Any questions about that? Don't see any. Oh, Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to changing the lights, is there granting or rebates available? I know there is for most other facilities.
There are rebates available. We didn't include those rebates because until you go through the process, you apply for them, and then we'll find out what the rebate is. So you can be cognizant of the fact that it will be less than that. We would like to say, though, that if it is considerably less, we'd like to consider the offices as well, part of the program too, but we'll wait to see what the costing is.
Most times it's just changing the tubes, right? Put in LED tubes.
7 or 8 years ago, we were looking, well, they were replaced. We're looking going from metal halide to T5s on the floor, down in the change rooms, in the Rotary Hall as well. So it's a significant amount of change outs that we're looking at doing.
Okay, this doesn't seem like a lot of money for a significant amount.
Okay. So if there's nothing more on the Plex, then that moves on to the pool. And there's the 5-year forecast for the pool. Are there questions about it? I Don't see any, so that moves us to the two capital items there. There's the inflatable replacement. Any questions about that? Everybody just excited to use it when it comes. And then, I don't. Councillor Smith.
Is this a replacement for existing?
Correct.
Okay. And is there any consideration, I know that there is an age limit for this, I believe it's 7 or 8 and above. Have there been any consideration given to similar models that may be applicable for younger age groups as well? Just something to consider. I know it references birthday parties. Often that's for ages younger than 7, and I think they can't use those.
I can certainly speak with Michael about that.
Okay, anything else on that? There's the door replacement. Any questions about that? I don't see any. Oh, Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, and through you, just something that caught my eye through the rationale is that the doors currently get stuck, and there's a safety concern. Like, do we have an actual safety concern there right now that needs to be addressed rather than waiting for budget approval?
No, and if the chief would cover his ears, we keep those doors open. We should be keeping them closed for most majority of the time, but currently we keep those doors propped open.
Anything else? Don't see anything else on the pool, so that moves us on to other facilities. And there's a 5-year capital forecast there for that. I'll ask if there's any questions about the 5-year capital forecast for other facilities. Don't see any just now. So there's a list of items there, and we'll run through them. Proposed capital projects. The first is exterior painting on the Saugeen Shores Medical Building. Questions about that? I don't see any. There's the Morpeth condos, some renovation work in there. Any questions about that? Doesn't look like it. The Port Elgin Library, interior painting. Questions? No. The Port Elgin Library repointing of bricks. Any questions or comments there? No. Southampton Library, the replacement of the front door. Questions? No. Southampton Library washroom renovation. Questions? No. Southampton Town Hall carpet replacement. Questions? No. And the final one, Southampton Town Hall chair replacement. Questions? You sure? Okay. Then that brings us to the end of community services. Thank you, Jane. We will break now for 15 minutes. Okay, why don't we call the meeting back to order? I have to head to a 100th birthday party for 12 o'clock, so we'll head till just about 5 to 12, and then we'll recess for lunch at that point. We'll try to be back in time to, just up at the Chantry Centre. So, Infrastructure and Development Services, and the Director of Infrastructure and Development. Do you have some preliminary comments for us?
All I'll say is there's a large range of projects in this portfolio, so I'm open to questions as we go through instead of introducing them each.
Thank you. All right, so the first item is 9.1, engineering, and there you have the summary of the 5-year capital forecast. Are there questions about the engineering forecast? I don't see any, so you have the two proposed capital projects, pre-engineering and the GPS survey unit. Are there questions about either of those? The Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Amanda, the pre-engineering, is that done in-house or do we have to send it out?
This is hiring consultants for geotechnical permits to take water and topographical survey.
Anything further on either of those items? I don't see anything, so that takes us on to 9.2, roads, roadsides, and sidewalks, and the 5-year capital forecast. Questions or comments about the 5-year capital forecast for roads and roadsides and sidewalks? The Vice Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, just 2021, I'm pleased to see that
Anything else? The Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a very thorough list, Amanda. Well done. The only street I do not see on there that I believe needs some work is Victoria Street between Adelaide and Spence, where the dip is at the bottom. We don't have any filtration there or drainage, and the residents that live at the bottom of the dip really do not appreciate having the pond every time it rains.
Oh, through you, there's two things that we're working on in Southampton. One is the drainage master plan. So when we have that better defined, we'll be able to include storm sewer and channelization projects that could help with that. A drainage pit might also be another solution, so that could be in the 2021 drainage pit budget to look at that area as an interim.
If you get a chance just to look at it after one of the rainstorms or in the spring during the melt, that would be great. They'd really appreciate it.
The Vice Deputy Mayor?
So I just want to go back to Jay and George just 1 second. Amanda, it's in the budget somewhere, I believe, but there were dollars allocated in 2020 for some engineering work, I think, for J. Snyder Street. Is it in here somewhere in the budget, or am I?
Director?
It is in as a council request. So it's not, that's why it doesn't show up in this column, because it's under a council request. So it's not included in your total budget proposed for 2020.
Anything further about the 5-year capital forecast? As was pointed out, this is a great and thorough list, and it's a good place for anybody who's interested to know when their road's going to get worked on to take a look. If you check this page out, you can pretty well get a sense of when you're in the schedule for the Deputy Mayor.
That's a very good comment, Mr. Mayor. And through you, once budget is approved, I think this would be prudent to have posted on our website to let people know when their road construction is scheduled for, not when it'll happen, but what year that we'll be looking at improving.
Okay. If there's nothing further on the 5-year capital, then we'll start going through the capital projects. The first one is asphalt resurfacing annual program. Any questions about it? Doesn't look like it. Next is the drainage pits, which is also an annual expenditure. Are there any questions about that one? Are we, Amanda? Are we on a continuous cycle of drainage pit repair? I know that we're well. It seems to me we're always traditionally been well behind the need for drainage pit repair, and I guess where does the department see us at with the drainage pits? Are we where we need to be, or should we be spending more on drainage pits? To me, it seems like a pressing need because of the size of the rainfall events we're getting, and the pits being under more and more pressure every year. And I just wonder, are we spending the right amount on those drainage pits to stay ahead of the problem?
Thank you. I don't believe so. We're putting as much money as we can fiscally afford to put into them. They have a 25-year life expectancy depending on when and how they are installed. So it's sort of like the sewer videos where you'll always be spending money to retrofit what's there. The drainage master plan will help us identify these areas as well. And so some of the drainage pits will be replaced with storm sewers and end-of-pipe facilities instead. So I think that what we're doing right now is fine for now, but you'll see a change to it in the future.
Okay. If there's nothing more on that, then there's Ridge Street. Questions about Ridge Street? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you. Amanda, what will the trail surface be?
Currently, we are expecting it to be a stone dust trail.
Stone dust, okay. And sorry, it's a follow-up. Sorry, yeah. And I guess maybe more for Jane then, is with our trail inventory, and it's growing a little bit, this will be, I'm not sure how many meters this is, but it'll be significant. Do we still have one staff person that is just allocated towards trails, and is there a point that as our trail network system grows that we need to look at increasing that?
Increasing the staff person? No, not at this point. We're confident in the amount of space that he inspects is sufficient for his work plan.
Anything further on Ridge Street? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Amanda, this is just going to be a dead-headed sewer system we're putting in there, is that? And it's just for the capability of future expansion?
So through, it will connect all of Bruce Road 25, future development. It also bring the lands from the Lamont Pit across the highway, and the trailer park up or south of 25 will all come into this trunk, which will then go down to the Harbor Street pumping station and over. That's the intention of the project.
Okay, but for the purposes of this project, it's not connecting any sewers to it just now. It's just going to deadhead at 25 until we have future expansion?
And then the phase 3 of Bruce Road 25, when it continues, it will then connect into there. So this is just the place where Bruce Road 25 is at. So the next stage of Bruce Road 25 will connect more sewers, and they'll connect into it then. So that would be next year.
Right, but as for this year, for 2020, it's not doing anything, just we're putting it in the ground. It's not going to carry any sewage.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the timing is critical though, because the phase 3 Bruce Road 25 project was scheduled to be a 2021 project, and so getting it done this year is important. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like the bicycle pedestrian trail connectivity, being able to get from major part of town across to 25, because it's very busy and we haven't got our cycle lanes on there yet, so this will make transportation a lot better.
If there's nothing else on Ridge Street, then we'll move on to the Bruce Road 25 Phase 2. Questions about that project? I don't see any. Then there's Lewis Street. Questions or comments about that project? I don't see any. So then there's Bricker Street. Questions or comments about Bricker? I don't see any. So that moves us on to Linden Court Drainage Pit. Questions about the Linden Court Drainage Pit? Don't see any. So that moves on to the River Road Bank Stabilization Project. Questions about that? Have we finished the Class BEA? Is it complete and we have the recommendations now?
We have the recommendations. I will double check on the status of the notice of completion, but I believe it has been mailed out. I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay, if there's nothing more on the bank stabilization project, then there's the Goddard Street storm sewer. Questions about the Goddard Street storm sewer? Don't see any. So that moves on to Beach Street. Any questions about the Beach Street project? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amanda, I did ask you about this, but I wondered if you could explain for the sake of the public about the parking lot considerations that you're going to be taking into account during the construction.
Thank you. Through what I meant by that line is at the end of Beach Street, we don't want this design to have any impacts on how that parking lot functions. So where the sidewalk ends, we want it to be a safe spot for pedestrians to come off the sidewalk into that. We want to make sure the curb radii end in a way that it's not going to be something that someone drives over, and we'll be looking at how that entrance works at the Beach Street, Front Street intersection.
Anything further on Beach Street? I don't see anything. Catherine Street? Don't see anything on Catherine. Davy Drive? Don't see anything there. The Elgin Street sidewalk? Nothing. The overall sidewalk replacement program? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll sound like former councillor Minaj here. Amanda, will all our sidewalks be going to the same standard size, or will they vary?
All new sidewalk being installed will be the 1.5 meter width, which is the standard.
Thank you.
Anything else on the sidewalk replacement program? And then the final one there, the overhead doors at the shops. Any questions about that? Doesn't look like it. So that moves us on to 9.3, bridges and culverts. You have the 5-year capital forecast there. Any questions about the 5-year capital forecast on bridges and culverts? Don't see anything. So there's your 6 projects there. The first one is the McEwing Bridge, which is a transfer to reserve. Is there any questions about the transfer to reserve for the McEwing Bridge project? Don't see any. So that moves us on to the bridge and culvert rehabilitation funding. Any questions about that? No. So that moves us then on to the Saugeen River Bridge pier rehabilitation. Questions about it? I don't see any there. So then the Kolb. Any questions about the work to the Kolb Bridge? Don't see any. So the Moore Bridge. Any questions about work proposed to the Moore Bridge? No. And then there's the last one there, the Concession 2 culvert. Questions about that? Nope. Councillor Mayette.
Could I go back to the Moore Bridge for just a minute?
Yep.
When you talk about replace as a pedestrian bridge, do you mean just leave it as is and use it as a pedestrian bridge, keep the blocks in place for the Moore Bridge?
No, the Moore Bridge is not structurally sound to be able to do that, so it would be a removal and replacement with a pedestrian structure. Oh, can I get you to go back to that one? In our bridge plan, we have been looking at how to fund these without having the historic transfer to reserve. So if you look at the Moore Bridge, we are looking at having to replace it as a pedestrian bridge, do the Class EA through the 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. That's when the final bridge will be built for Moore as a pedestrian bridge.
I don't see that going out to 2024. Your dates are back to 2012 there.
No, that's a historic reserve,
sorry.
so then, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, 23. So, Moore Bridge replacement. 125, 125, 100, is that?
That's right, and then 120.
That's the amount you're looking at to replace it with a pedestrian bridge?
That's correct.
Okay, anything else? We've gone now through all the bridges. Anything else in any of the bridge projects before we move on? Doesn't look like it. So that takes us then on to 9.4, streetlights, and the 5-year capital forecast for streetlights. Any questions on the capital forecast, the Deputy Mayor?
When we're looking at sorry, Mr. Mayor, through you, when we're looking at our streetlight replacement program to try and head off any of the issues that we had a couple years ago with the residents of Parkwood, will we be looking at involving the residents to decide on what kind of poles we will be replacing them with? They won't be just straight wooden or metal poles that aren't conclusive or conducive to their residents?
Thank you, through. The pole trans conversion is coming to an end this year with West Stereo Hydro, so we've been doing like for like in that same neighborhood. What this represents is broken ones that need to be replaced, so they would be like for like in that neighborhood for this.
Anything else on the whole streetlight category? Don't see anything, so that moves us then on to traffic signals and controls and the 5-year capital forecast. Any questions about the 5-year capital forecast for traffic signals and controls? The Deputy Mayor.
No, Mr. Mayor, this is a great project. I'm just most looking forward to the Ivings Drive Godring Street intersection upgrade.
I'm sure you're the only one. Is there anything else on the 5-year capital forecast on that? No, so that moves on to the three proposed capital projects, and the first one is, well, we'll skip that one. No one cares about that one. The Iving Drive and Goddard Street intersection. Any questions or comments about that one? Nope. All right, and that moves us then on to Goddard Street pedestrian crosswalk upgrade. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Amanda, the audibles, is that just the beeping for our visually impaired
That's correct.
pedestrians?
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else on that? And then there's the one more there, Albert Street pedestrian crosswalk upgrade. Any questions about it? I don't see any. All right, so that's the end of traffic signals and controls, and that moves us on to 9.6, cemetery, and the 5-year capital forecast. Are there any questions about the 5-year capital forecast for the cemeteries? I don't see any on that. So there's the capital projects there, and there's 4 of them, and the first one is the cemetery mausoleums. Questions about that? I don't see any. There's the headstone foundation repairs. Questions about that? The Sanctuary Park Cemetery paving. Questions? Concerns? And then the last one, landscaping improvements. Questions or comments? Councillor Mayan.
Can I jump just back to headstone foundation repairs?
Yep.
Is there a, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there a component of the families that are under those headstones? Like the initial purchase is by the family for a headstone, right? Or a monument or whatever they choose. So when they become in disrepair, is there not a expectation that the family would pay the part of the upgrade?
No, there's not. So when you purchase a headstone and a plot, you pay a care and maintenance fee that goes into a reserve, and we get the interest out of that reserve, and that goes into these maintenances. We're not allowed to touch the principal, but the interest is ours for maintenance.
I'll keep that in mind for future reference.
Anything further on the cemeteries? I don't see anything, so that moves us then to 9.7, water and sewer. And there's the water and sewer capital forecast. Questions or comments with regard to that? Councillor Mayette.
I know we're going to get to them individually, but with what Southampton pollution control plant, and for that matter, the Port Elgin pollution control plant, are we adding any capacity to these plants through these upgrades?
These don't have the capacity. They are at a rated capacity now, so as they're operating, we can turn clarifiers on and off to boost that. There isn't a need at this time to add capacity. That being said, the Southampton one is going through the Class EA process, and it is to add a capacity. So they've recommended some operational improvements that are required at Southampton no matter what option we pick. Those are what are included in this capital plan. As that moves forward for capacity improvements, then you'll see that coming forward, and that report will come to you in the spring.
Anything further on the 5-year capital forecast in water and sewer? I don't see anything, so we'll go through the capital projects. And the first one is the Southampton Water Pollution Control Plant. Questions or comments with regard to that? I don't see any. Port Elgin Water Pollution Control Plant. The Mill Creek Generator Replacement. The Southampton WPCP Class EA upgrades. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amanda, for several of these, including this one, you have an asterisked note at the bottom saying possible green funding opportunity.
Thank you. Through you, the province has put out an infrastructure green stream funding that is due the end of January. So I've just highlighted for your information the ones that we're considering to be putting forward. So the rules have to be, it has to be existing, It has to be a replacement, and it has to include sewage, access to safe drinking water, or stormwater management quality.
That's the Investing in Canada. That's the green stream of the Investing in Canada fund. So that's the split federal and provincial funding. It's the same overall fund that we asked for funding for the recreation center in, but this is the green side of that. So, the Southampton water treatment plant. Questions? The Port Elgin water tower site fencing. The Southampton residential water meter replacement. The Xenon Councillor Schreider.
Sorry, through you. How many water meters would 200,000 replace?
1,000. They're about $200 each.
Anything else on that one? The Xenon replacement modules. The Southampton water tower refurbishment. The hydrant replacement. And finally, the hydrant flow test and painting. There's nothing on any of those water and sewer projects remaining. Then we'll move on to parking. There is a forecast there. There is no capital projects. Anything on parking? I don't see anything there. So that moves us on to waste management. There's a 5-year capital forecast for waste management. Questions or comments with regard to that? Pretty simple capital forecast. It doesn't forecast anything. Councillor Mayette.
Well, the leaf and yard waste staging area, is there a land acquisition there, or is this just part of our composting site?
That is just our composting site. That is just continuing the work that we've done to better organize that area. Now, just note that the 5-year, you'll see a change in 2021 with a 5-year forecast based on the waste management plan that comes out.
But at $45,000, is that more just a operating cost, really, than a capital investment? We're not adding any equipment or acquisition or of any land or space. We're just, I don't know, what are we getting new for $45,000?
You know how we've been there with the new bins, with the concrete bins and the segregation of the material? It's more work that's like that, so access roads and those staging areas. So we have the area where the composts are piled up, so it'll be the staging setup of those areas.
Okay.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just wanted to compliment Amanda and your department for that. It has been a great development out there. People that go out there are happy with the staging. Do we have a turnaround time from the time that the material comes in that it becomes biodegradable compost?
There is a time, and there is a schedule for flipping and turning and doing that. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I can get back to you in general terms.
That would be nice. Thank you very much. And will we have an area set out there for after the holiday season for people to bring and dump off Christmas trees, or is that somewhere that's going to go into the main landfill? Will we be bringing the chipper shredder over there to do that, or where do you want those?
That has not been a directive from council to do before, so it is not something that we had envisioned doing. That would come from you as something we would need to do. Christmas trees just go into the landfill. You cannot bring in brush into the compost site. It's just leaves and yard waste.
Anything further? There is only the one capital item there, and so we've already discussed it. So if there's nothing further on that, then that brings us to the end of the Infrastructure and Development Department, and on to the item 10, the council requests. So these items are not built into the budget at this time. Anything council chooses to add to or remove from the budget will obviously have an impact on those overall, ultimately the contributions to the legacy fund. So we can go through these one at a time, and I think the best thing to do is to decide on them one at a time as we go through them so that we can give some clear direction as to what we want to do with them. Do you have a preliminary comment, or do you want to deal with... So we'll start then with the first request, which is Snyder Street, and discussion. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been an ongoing issue down there. I've recovered from whiplash several times as I drive the road. It is something that needs to be done, and I will be supporting this motion.
So, to be clear, the proposed 2020 cost is $50,000 for design. So, I think we can hold off the $656 till the 2021 discussions. It's because we frankly don't even know what it'll cost with any accuracy until we do a design, I assume. So we're talking a $50,000 add to the budget for designs for Snyder Street. We'll get Councillor Grace.
Mr. Mayor, so one of the considerations says for the director, future sanitary sewer construction could be through non-traditional means. Could you explain further?
So historically, this project has looked at waiting until all the money was there to have a sanitary pumping station down at the bottom through Goebels Grove to service this. And people wanted to hold back on fixing the road so that you weren't going to rip up a new road and put a sanitary sewer underneath. So when we look at this and we're going to move forward with a road design, we can do sanitary sewers in a different location. So maybe we have it in the boulevard under the sidewalk instead, where we would normally have telecommunications, or we do it through trenchless technology, where we're just having a couple pits at the end of the long stretches of the road and putting the trunk sewer down and then coming in and connecting in for the sanitary connections at that point in the future.
Council, or the Vice Deputy Mayor, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I obviously support this. I think this is something we absolutely need to do in 2020. And I'm disappointed it wasn't in the first phase of projects out of taxation. However, it isn't. So I'd like to see it added back in. The question I have for you, though, Mr. Mayor, is at what point in time do we... I mean, I'm not in favor of reducing the contribution to the legacy reserve either. So I am in favor of taking a look at some of the projects we've discussed and removing them, deferring them to 2020. And at what point in time do we bring those items forward?
What I would suggest we do is go through this list of council requests, vote them up or down, and then after that we'll get an estimate from the treasurer as to where we're at, and then council can make further decisions about how it wants to reconcile the budget. Okay?
Fair enough, thank you. I'd like to see this one be placed into the budget.
So it's been moved by the Deputy Mayor. I'll suggest seconded by the Vice Deputy Mayor that $50,000 is added to the 2020 budget for design work for the Snyder Street Road reconstruction. Are there further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Then that moves us on to Bruce Road 25 outlet. Discussion. This is a $250,000 requested add to the budget. Questions or comments? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm presuming that this $250,000 will implement what our ad hoc committee recommended, or is this something above that?
Thank you. That's exactly what it is. So I have a quotation to do the design of it, and assuming 8% engineering, that's where the $250,000 comes out for that. But it will be the recommendation coming out of that ad hoc committee that we would implement.
Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, and through you, just a clarification. So this work for the $250,000 is not included in Phase 1 or Phase 2?
That's correct. So the county and the town were responsible for creating an outlet to the beach, which has been included in the Bruce Road 25 pieces. This work is to enhance the outlet at the beach to satisfy the users with something that is more aesthetic than a hard engineering thing. The original design had just included a simple plunge pool at the end, and we got a lot of neighbor feedback that that wouldn't be acceptable, so this is enhancing around that area.
Okay. And just for clarification, the Phase 2 that we had looked at earlier, that this has no bearing on that?
That's correct. Phase 2 can, if this goes or not, Phase 2 would carry on without a problem.
Further comments? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do we have any sense of some kind of a pledge for fundraising of what might be projected to be raised?
I don't. Minnie Jakes had suggested reaching out to the TD Green Fund, and that'd be one place to access funds, because this will also be a trailhead for cycling. If the province was to bring back any funding for cycling, we could look into that. And then the Beecher Association had originally mentioned that they would look at supporting funds. I'm not sure if that's in the cards at this time or not.
Further comments? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, this is one that we have over 20 of these beach access, these drains down to our waterfront, and I think this is a good opportunity to create a gold standard for design for an outflow. What it will look like. I mean, I think it's going to be a great addition as a end of trailhead design that's going to be more aesthetically pleasing for people who frequent our waterfront, and it's a big ticket item. I certainly have been very supportive of doing something down there, and I know the committee's working hard. I know the residents in that area are looking for a design that's going to be aesthetically pleasing, and so I support it. I think at the end of the day, though, we're going to have to, for $250,000, a lot of money for the taxation. You know, it's about a 1.5–2% tax increase over top of what we may be looking at, perhaps. So, but I do support it, and I think that's why I asked my question earlier about, you know, what would be the opportune time to take a look at other projects that might be deferred to 2021. So I am going to support this one, but I think at the end of the day, we certainly need to take a look at the numbers and see where we can reduce in other areas, perhaps.
So we'll get the director and then take more questions. The director.
Sure. So the quotation I have to do the design is $3,900. So we could move forward with that design, have that completed, start looking at funding opportunities, and you could, at this point for 2020, approve a value that you're comfortable with to do that, or you could just approve the $3,900 for the design piece, or you could you could direct me as to whatever value you want, but as a minimum, I would like to see the $3,900 for design.
So you, through you to Amanda, so man, what you're saying is the design work could be done in 2020 with the actual project council discuss it for 2021 budget. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's what I'm saying. Alternatively, I could come back with a great story that says I found all the money we need from TD.
So we have
that may be the right alternative.
We have Councillor Grace, and I'll get Rich, and then the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under your considerations, Amanda, you say erosion of facility protection. Are you saying that a goal of the design, of this added design, would be to protect this outlet from erosion?
Where the outlet comes out, the water will need to turn a bend, and so it's putting protection along that bend so it stays stable, and the facility, the sand won't just slough back into whatever we build. So one of our considerations is that's a costly endeavor, and how we would make that work.
Follow-up? Wouldn't we want to be building that into whatever design we've already funded?
That will be built into the design. It's one of the design considerations, is what that means. So that's...
It will be regardless of this $250,000? That's what I'm asking. Is the $250,000, is the protection from erosion dependent on going ahead with additional funding through this $250,000?
Maybe I'm not following, but the outlet is the way it is today, would continue to act in the manner that it's acting, where the sand is moving with the water. In the proposed design, we would be directing where that water goes, and so erosion protection of that new facility will be included in the design, which is included in that $250,000.
So just to confirm then, the current design without the $250,000 of the current build does not add this increased protection from erosion.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So this is one I struggled with a little bit. $250,000 sounds like a lot of money, especially if you take into consideration what Vice Deputy Mayor was saying about other outlets. I'd be very supportive of seeing the design, but I'd really like to see, because it's just going to be an outlet for water, how this looks, and then say, okay, after we spend $250,000, what do we got? And has it made a $250,000 aesthetic increase? But I'm in favor of seeing the design, that's for sure. I think I would have trouble supporting it without seeing it, though.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. I like Amanda's idea of doing the design first, because I know the public input down there will be greatly appreciated and they'll want to have a say into it. So if we get that design done, public input will save a whole lot of hassles, and then we look at what it's required and bringing this up forward for next year.
Okay, so we've had some good discussion on that. We can, if we fund the design today, I think that would be a good idea, maybe $5,000 to fund a design for this project, a detailed design, and then see what that looks like coming back mid-year. Staff can look at potential funding alternatives. I would suggest that staff look at all the funding alternatives, including drawing from reserves and borrowing to pay for this project when they return. I would like to see us proceed with funding it in the year 2020. I think that this is a major project. I think it's hard. It's important not to forget that this, we're going to now. This is basically a significant drain for the entire south end of Port Elgin, draining massive amounts of potential new development on the ridgelands. It's a critical drain, and one that we had to build, and I'm glad that we have built. But it comes with an effect on the beach, and that effect needs to be mitigated. And I think that we need to take aggressive action as we build new drains on the beach to make sure that the waterfront is not impacted, and hopefully, in fact, and I strongly believe it could be improved by this development, and if we spend money here, not only improve the beach, but also improve it as a trailhead area. And a natural, maybe not a natural feature, but a naturalized feature to just overall enhance that part of the beach. So I suggest we should fund the design now, and I'd like to see us consider funding the construction later this year through whatever means the administration may choose to recommend. Is there a mover and seconder to fund $5,000 for the design? The Vice Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Carr. Any further questions? All in favor? That's carried. So, that moves us on then to paved shoulders. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is my request. As we're looking at our bike-friendly initiative going forward to silver designation, we have to start looking at this, and I'll be pushing you yourself, Mr. Mayor, to be bringing this to to county, that they start to implement paved shoulders for the roads. We know how well it works in Meaford and Thornbury, the number of people that get there daily, weekly, monthly, the amount of money that comes in through tourism. Now, I know $4.9 million is a lot of money, and I'm not asking for that all at once, but I do believe we should be looking at starting to do the streets that work with the Grand Fondo, the number of people that ride the Grand Fondo that come in. I just had a fortuitous meeting with a gentleman in the grocery store on Sunday who said, man, you guys have an untapped resource up here. He says, I belong to a bikers club that rides gravel roads now. So they still ride on street bikes, but with modified tires. So it's not the big fatties that ride in the wintertime. They're not the mountain bikes. They're still a road bike, but with modified tires. And he says, we would pay hundreds of dollars to come up here, and I'm glad to see that you're starting to get the hotels up here to accommodate us. He said, but the more you can do, the more we can push this, and this will all build into our sports tourism strategy, our bike-friendly strategy. So I'd like to move that we allocate some money. I would suggest that we start looking from the end of the Grand Fondo out to County Road 3 at least for this year, going up High Street and Carlisle and the Dalside Road to get those done. That's the finishing route. And then with the bike-friendly initiative that hopefully we'll be beginning our ad hoc committee in the new year, and we'll look at some opportunities that are there. And also there's always lots of grants that we can apply for to help bring this forward.
Okay, questions or further comments, I guess. Councillor Mayette?
It is a lot of money, and I'm not sure there's a direct return on investment. I believe there's some that it attracts the big events and the cyclists from across the area. But the question is, has not the strategy been, and maybe to the director, to consider these lanes as the roads are being routine, as their schedule of repaving and reconstruction takes place? And wouldn't it make more sense to look at specific roads when the opportunities arise?
That's what the request was, and so we had done that. What this shows here was the cost if we're doing it with the road being reconstructed. So that 4.9 million has all of those roads with new asphalt edge to edge with an expanded base for bike paths or paved shoulders. And I did that because that's how we would like to progress it, but none of these roads were falling in the 5-year capital plan. So there is an option of putting just a strip of pavement down the side, which we don't like because it creates a weakness and water can get in and that. So we look to you for direction on if you want to look at advancing some of these roads in their capital program to be able to do the paved shoulders all as one.
So just to be clear, though, this dollar figure, 4.9 million, is if you're replacing the whole road with a widened shoulder.
That's correct. So we would pulverize and repave the road with a wider.
And this is the additional cost on top of the reconstructed road. This is the whole road reconstruction cost.
That is the whole reconstruction cost.
Okay. So Rich, and then we'll come to the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in it, and certainly over the long haul. I'd like to see it as well in the forecast for redoing the roads. The only part that I would say, from my perspective, that would be nice to do now would be the 10th concession, which would effectively connect the rail trail and the shore trails together for cycling. And I think that is something that's needed to get across 21 Highway and kind of connect there, create a safe passage for cyclists to go that way. But the rest of the stuff I could see just going through when the roads need to be done.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Amanda. So Amanda, the Grey County Road 40, 270,632 per kilometer in 2019 for 1.25 meter width. So is that just is some of the work been done, you mean? That's a county road, obviously, so is that what they did spend, or is that?
That's correct. So this summer, Sutherland's did that work for Grey County, and that's the cost that their tender came in at. So.
Do they have shoulders there? I'm not sure. Does that section have shoulders, like paved shoulders?
Yes, so that's exactly what they did. They replaced all their gravel shoulders in that contract with paved shoulders.
I see.
So that also includes sort of the change to some guardrails that would be required. It had line painting, all that. So this would be that, applying that total project cost to what we would do here.
So taking 10th concession as a comparable, as Councillor Rich mentioned, so is my math correct? Is that a $650,000 roughly expense?
Yep.
So 650, right?
Yeah. Sorry, through you, that would include all new asphalt on concession 10
the
as
total
well.
road plus the that's the number it includes. Okay.
The Deputy Mayor.
I just might also add that when we do decide the paved shoulders, it reduces the amount of work that is required, the cost for maintaining the gravel on the sides. We don't have to grade the sides of the road to keep them up so that the cars don't slip off. It doesn't chip off of the gravel, the asphalt, because the grader's on there. By making these one solid road, there's a cost saving. Yes, it costs at first, but there's a cost saving over time, and the amount of dollars that will be benefited in the community because of the increased tourist traffic will be, you can't compare that right now because we don't match that. But the number of people, we are on the Blue Water Cycle Route from Sarnia to Midland. We are now becoming known as a cycle destination because of the Grand Fondo, because of the magnificent trails we have going. People are coming here. We have to keep bringing them here, so we have to take a piece of this at a time. Like I said, I'm not asking for all 4 million right now. That's silly, but we do have to choose a couple of these roads to get them done and bring the people here.
Vice Deputy Mayor?
So, Mr. Mayor, just to follow up then, so you, Deputy Mayor, you were suggesting one section of road this year. I don't know which one it was. Was there one section? I just was trying to figure out what you're talking about here.
I was suggesting that we finish the final road coming in from the Grand Fondo. So from County Road 3, which would be the Dahl Side Road, past the dump, and up High Street.
So, through you to Amanda again, none of these roads, Amanda, are in our capital forecast for 5-year capital replacement, correct?
That's correct.
So, I'm a big supporter of paved shoulders. I think paved shoulders, in a perfect world, I like to do it all, if we were able to do it. We've got a very substantial project coming up in 2020, 2021 in our Lamont Sports Park. Big dollars for boring maybe from tax levy, maybe from legacy fund, who knows where. We've got a pool on the horizon, a significant $27 million decision over the next couple of years. We'll be in the ground, hopefully. We've got Southampton Town Hall on the horizon, multi-million-dollar project. I like to do it all, too. I just, with none of these roads in the capital forecast for the next 5 years, I'm just reluctant to support an expenditure of this nature, when it's not showing up in 5 years. So I'm having trouble, although albeit, Deputy Mayor, I do support paved shoulders. I'm a big supporter of it. I just, I think we've got some huge projects on the horizon here that this one I would rather have the discussion perhaps again next year.
Councillor Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, again. I have to concur with the Vice Deputy Mayor in many instances where it's possible and where a road is heavily used by vehicles. If it was on a main thoroughfare or connector route, these make all the sense in the world. But to me, Dahl Side Road and the Dump Road, they're not heavily used roads. And in my experience, and in talking with other motorists as well, not just pleasure motorists, but people who drive commercial vehicles in the community, is they get frustrated too. And I've seen it myself where there is a trail or there is a paved shoulder, but the cyclists continue to ride on the driven part of the road, sometimes just because they can. So I'm not sure that there's a widespread support for this kind of expenditure, and I'm going to have a hard time supporting it also.
We'll get Councillor Schreider, and then we'll get the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and through you, Grand Fondo has been taking place after our Parks and Trails Master Plan, and I think we are looking at 3 different things. We're looking at, this is the trail route for the Grand Fondo, which is great. Wonderful event. I volunteer at it. It's fantastic. We have the Parks and Trails Master Plan that also identifies paved shoulders on it, so we need to compare those 2 things because we do have a Parks and Trails Master Plan. And then I think that we also have to look at Amanda's forecast with where these roads actually fall in line. And I understand if they're not in the 5 years, but is that over 10 years? Is it over 15 years? Because we have 3 separate plans, I think, that really need to be considered and looked at together. So perhaps for next year budget consideration that a plan could be developed.
The Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make my last push here. Safety, as Councillor Mayad has just said, is of prime concern. Concession 10 is a deadly road. It's got a hill where people can't see. Cars go very fast down there. There's a gravel shoulder. It's a bicyclist, walker's nightmare. I would suggest then that we look at doing concession 10 from the bottom of the hill up to the Highway 21. And that's our first step. We'll see what happens. I know it's not on there, but it is accident waiting to happen.
Yes, I'll just make my own comment. I support the concept of installing bicycle lanes, paved shoulders on roads when they come up for reconstruction. I cannot support pulverizing perfectly good roads just to put bike lanes on them. They have to wait until they come up in the capital plan before we can do that. We have a lot of priorities and a lot of different safety concerns and a lot of different other pressures, and we're biting off as many of them as we can every year. But frankly, roads like Snyder Road need to be pulverized first before we start pulverizing the 10th concession. So that's my view. Is there any action council wants to take on this? I'm open to motions or anything else. Vice Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, if you need a motion, I would move that we defer this discussion till 2021. We can rediscuss it at that point in time.
Okay, that's a motion. Move to defer to the 2021 budget. Seconded by Councillor Schreider. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. All right, that moves on to item 4, rainbow crosswalks. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and this is another one of mine. I have discussed this several times with yourself and other staff members. I think it's time that we bring one of these. We've recognized the LGBTQ community. We have Pride Month in June. I think there's ways that we can pay for this other than through taxation. I think there's grants and monies that we can accrue for this. The location at the high school is the perfect spot. Unfortunately, it is county road, so that we can't take care of it. But I do believe this is very important. It'll go a long way in our community.
Okay, comments? Councillor Mayette.
I understand this is, thank you, Mr. Mayor, thermoplastic paint melted into the asphalt, but somehow I can't possibly conceive of $10,000 to paint across a road. There must be a more economical way to do it than that. Maybe just regular paint. I don't know. I could see putting some money to it and allowing our robust community groups to have an opportunity to rally behind this. But I would say $2,000, which should be an adequate amount.
Do you have a comment?
Just a comment to that. When I was going through these, I was speaking to Bruce County to make sure that they would allow us to put it on their road, and they're okay with that. Their caveat was, you put it on our road, you are responsible for its care and maintenance. And then this one that you see on the screen is the one that was done in Barrie, and it cost $10,000 because of the thermoplastic paint. So my thinking with it was, if we're the ones that want it and are responsible and want it to look good, this is the way to go. There is the other paint that we can use that we normally use for our line paint. It's the more organic paint that would need to be done on an annual basis. So this would be longer lasting. It would look nicer, and that's why I picked this. I can come back with a cost for what it would be with the other paint, but just so you know, it would only be here for the one season.
I suspect this is one where, as the councillor points out, fundraising would definitely be possible, and where certain groups would contribute to it. So we can proceed however you like. We could contribute a portion of this $10,000 and look for fundraising to finish it, or you can earmark the $10,000 from somewhere other than taxation and hope to fundraise a portion of it. Just a couple of thoughts, Councillor Mayette.
I would move that we allocate $2,000. And if we want to upgrade to a more elaborate paint scheme or paint materials, then we look to community support.
Council has moved that we fund this to the tune of $2,000. Is there a seconder for that resolution? There is not a seconder. There's a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Rich. Discussion. The Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I agree that we should be looking at trying to get some community involvement and other grants that are available. However, you get what you pay for. As our director has said, if you do it any other way, it washes off. In a year, you got to do it again, and you got to do it again, and you got to do it again. Let's do this right. Let's do this once. I would suggest $5,000 and then try and raise what is remaining. Look at the county, look at other groups, but I don't believe $2,000 is enough to get this done.
Okay. Further discussion on the resolution for $2,000. I will also be opposing the resolution for 2,000. I think a 50% fund would be more appropriate. If there's nothing further then, all in favor? Opposed? That's defeated. So is there another resolution on it, the Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we put in half the $5,000 and look to community involvement and sponsorship to do the rest.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Smith. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so that moves us on to the Huron Street Sidewalk Winter Control. Discussion. Councillor Rich.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. In that area of Southampton, when I was campaigning this year, there were a lot of people that were dissatisfied with the amount of snow removal on the sidewalks in that area. There's a lot more retirees moving to the area. There's a lot more young families, kids that need to get to the bus. And I think that by extending our road maintenance into that area, it'll allow for safer traffic up and down the sidewalks. I know it is a big hit, as snow removal is, but I think it's something that's necessary as our community grows and we get more populated down in that region of our community.
How far off are we to the director from being able to justify through the normal process another trackless machine and operator in Southampton?
We don't have a lot of requests for different kilometers, but we have a lot of requests for the same kilometers, if that makes sense. So this piece is asked for repeatedly by a lot of people, but we're not close to the 10 kilometers that we would normally have. One trackless machine would allow us to do all of Southampton, though. That's the difference between here and Port Elgin. Because of the remaining things, if we had two people going through Southampton, all sidewalks would be plowed.
Comments? Councillor Smith.
Can you comment on, similarly, the Port Elgin, the question was asked regarding how close we are to that, there's a threshold, rather. Are we close to that in Port Elgin, and is there any efficiencies that could be garnered by sharing resources, either equipment or otherwise, between the two?
There would be no efficiencies to share because you would be either driving a trackless machine the 7 kilometers between the two places. So unless we started doing the North Shore Trail for that, I'm not sure where we're at on Port Elgin, honestly, but I'm not sure where that one is. I can find that out on that one. I just want to note, too, that the provincial minimum maintenance standards, this would make that a lot easier for me to meet in the Southampton area instead of signing closed sidewalks.
There are additional requests for sidewalk plowing in Port Elgin, though. They have not quite reached the 10-kilometer threshold at this point, but there are outstanding additional kilometer requests in Port Elgin at this time.
That's correct. A couple of years ago, we added one with 12 kilometers requests that we were satisfied, but we haven't built back up in the last 2 years until 10.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, too, have received requests for additional stretches of sidewalk in Southampton to be plowed over in the subdivision around Tyendinaga, that area, the Millard Boulevard area, areas up in the Island Street, Cedar Bush area. I mean, there are lots of different places that we get requests from. And when I get those requests, I ask residents to submit them, or I submit them for them. I guess I'm wondering, because we do get so many requests, I think, in both towns, is there a more organized way that we should be submitting these so that we can get up to the 10-kilometer threshold?
It's actually just the length of sidewalk that exists. So when you think about Southampton, every block needs to be requested to hit 10 kilometers. So that's why it's not happening in Southampton. There's not enough sidewalk left in Southampton. One machine will finish it all off.
Comments? So you can do a couple of things here. You go, Councillor Schreider.
And through you, maybe just for clarification then, so one more unit and one more employee and operator would do all of the sidewalks in Southampton.
That is correct.
Okay. And the 75,000 for wages and benefits, that's for one full year. If we did a hire in October, we would only require 3 or 4 months of that if we approved in 2020, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then, sorry, just one more question, if you don't mind. And maybe to Phil, is this purchase is not identified in the fleet plan. How would that look to your plan to add 180 to it?
Just roughly, it's 118,000 and $18 million, so it wouldn't have a lot of impact.
Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, and through you to Amanda. Just curious too, is you said all the sidewalks would be able to be done in Southampton then. Are they all up to standard and proper width so that when we're buying the plows to the new standard that they're the proper width, that we're not going to be grading people's lawns and all that goes with it?
So through you, no, there will still be some that are 1 meter wide, and those are our problems. We have plow damage budget, so how that works is people call and report the plow damage. We go back out in the spring and retopsoil and seed in those areas. But there is that plow damage. No matter the standard, there's always the risk when you can't see the sidewalk on that first plow that there will be damage as well.
Councillor Smith.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can you confirm, you've alluded to a 100% sidewalk clearing in Southampton if this were to go forward. Can you confirm what percentage we're at in the Port Elgin community?
Not at this time. I can come back and tell you. I have a sidewalk dashboard that shows me which ones are plowed, so it wouldn't be difficult to come back and tell you that difference. When we talk about 100% sidewalk plowing in Southampton, I just want to make the point too that just by math, the number of kilometers could work to do that. What I'm not convinced of is that we would do the sidewalks north of the river because on Ontario Street, it doesn't connect to anything. So to drive the trackless up the street to go across 10 houses and come back may take up too much time to make this work. So it may be one that either gets very occasional clearing, or it may be one that doesn't get clearing through the plan at all. We would then come back and show you how that would work as part of the 2020 winter operations plan.
So it's important to be clear, we have a standard for how we do this. It's based on requests, and the number of requests has to generally equal 10 kilometers. We have requests in both Port Elgin and in Southampton. In neither case do they meet the 10-kilometer threshold that we have set publicly for a very long time. So I think that if we want to revisit that, we'd better revisit it in more detail before we revisit it as we start spending money as part of the budget. So my view is that this would be a deferral until 2021. I'd be interested in seeing the whole report on all the outstanding requested streets in both Port Elgin and Southampton. We should make those reports public in some information report to council so that the public can see what's been requested and can understand the standard by which we're assessing this, and they can then determine what we want to do. I think one of the reasons why we set that as a standard is because some neighborhoods don't want their sidewalks plowed, amazingly, and so there's that side of it too, that you go out and you start plowing all the sidewalks and suddenly the neighborhoods who haven't requested it come and say, why are you doing this? So I think that's some steps we should take. So my suggestion would be for deferral, but it's up to you. Councillor, we'll get Councillor Rich. Councillor Rich.
I would only say that if, as Amanda has alluded to, that if we will never get another plow in Southampton, then that area will never be done because I'm not mistaken, you said that means that every person that has sidewalk in front of them would have to request that it be plowed. So this may be a little bit of a different situation, but I'm happy either way to revisit it and maybe look at a different way of going about it. I brought this forward because I received a lot of requests from people, however council wants to proceed.
The other thing that council can do when we receive a report back is discuss our policy for how we're doing this and decide whether we're happy with it. If that's indeed the case, that it may mean Southampton never gets pub, maybe we want to reconsider how we're doing it. But I just kind of think this is the wrong way to rejig a policy. Councillor Smith.
I would like to motion that we defer this until such time that we receive a report on the outstanding requests from citizens. Is that sufficient?
Sure. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Grace. All in favor? That's carried. So I got to slip out to the care center here. So why don't we break now for lunch, and we'll do the rest of these when we get back. We'll reconvene. Well, I hope to be back before too long, but say quarter to the hour, give or take.